All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gail Williams, and I'm the coordinator for the Exploring Leadership Colloquia series. And thank you all so much for coming out on a really very cold day. What I'd like to do is to introduce you to the host for today's colloquium, and that's Dennis Andrusik. Dennis is the director of the Applied Engineering and Technology Directorate. For those of you who are outsiders, we call that AETD. Would you give a warm welcome to Dennis?
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, thanks for coming out. I think we have a great program here today. The concept of appreciative leadership is actually kind of interesting. I'm old school, grew up old school, and Amanda and I were talking ahead of time. I grew up, and I mentioned this to her, when I was in my early formative career. The biggest motivators were greed, fear, and greed. No one ever mentioned appreciation in that trilogy of motivators. So as we've evolved over many years, and I won't tell you how many because that'll make me feel very old, I really welcome this concept and welcome the notion. I see NASA moving more and more towards that appreciative leadership, inclusion concept. And I tell you what, hearing what Amanda's got to say is, to me, very exciting and very interesting. It puts a name towards some of the things that we've been working towards, but more importantly, adds a lot of structure to it. And there's a whole lot of research that has been gone into her field of study that I have no clue about, and I want to hear a whole lot more about. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gail back to the podium, who will introduce Amanda formally.
Thank you. Before I introduce just a logistical request, I want to ask all of you who have phones or PDAs to either turn them off or onto silent mode, if you wouldn't mind, please. And I want to welcome the participants from our two remote sites, IV&V in West Virginia and Wallops in Virginia. And at the end, before you leave, I will be telling you a little bit about the new model that we're using for this colloquium in terms of pairing it with some learning clinics. So please stay to the very end so you can hear all about that, because there's still some room in the learning clinics should you choose to participate. Amanda Trosten-Bloom is the managing director for the Corporation for Positive Change. It's a consulting firm that uses appreciative inquiry for transformation as well as information in business, government, and the nonprofit world around the entire world. She's one of the first people to use appreciative inquiry for whole system change in the business setting. She's internationally recognized as a trainer, an author, and a speaker. Some of you have already seen the 3 books of just a subset of the books that she's written that are available here for sale. Amanda's work focuses primarily on strength-based change in the areas of cultural transformation, strategic planning, mergers and acquisitions, leadership development, and business process improvement. Over the course of 30 years, she's worked in a wide variety of arenas. Her clients, and the list is very long, I'm just going to give you a very few, those that are names that I think you'll easily recognize. Hewlett-Packard, Accenture, Hunter Douglas, and NSA, just to name a few. She's been an interview guest on radio and television programs across the nation, as well as the co-author of several books, The Power of Appreciative Inquiry, Appreciative Leadership, and Appreciative Team Building are the 3 that are available for sale today. So please, on a very, very cold day, give a very warm welcome. And this is a return visit because Amanda was here in 2005. So give her a 2011 warm welcome. Amanda Trosten-Bloom. Thanks.
You know, Gail talked about it being a very cold day, but I am from Denver, Colorado, and it was a whole lot colder in Denver, Colorado yesterday than it was today. I got up in 15 degree below zero weather, so this feels nice and toasty to me. I hope it's not rolling your way. You all have had your share of hard winter weather already. So thank you so much for inviting me back again to talk about our latest passion, which is appreciative leadership. We've spent years and years working in the field of appreciative inquiry. Some of you I have actually met before in this capacity, and now we're beginning to focus our attention differently on this field specifically related to leadership. And what we'll be doing today is discussing the broader context in which appreciative leadership was born. I will introduce something of what appreciative leadership is and its byproduct, which we call positive power. And then I will give you an opportunity to experience at a very high level, or at least be exposed to, 5 strategies that we've identified for fostering appreciative leadership across your organization. But before we do any of that, we're going to just have a little experience of appreciative leadership on a very minor scale. I'd like to give you all an opportunity to experience something that we call an appreciative check-in. Now, some of you came here with coworkers or friends, and I'd like to encourage you to stretch on this and to spend a minute talking with someone other than the person you came in the door with. Or if you're sitting separately in the room, to scooch over and sit next to someone else. Just take a moment, turn to someone, and share something that has gone really well for you here at work in the last couple of weeks. Something that you really feel proud of, something that you feel a sense of joy and pride in. Take a moment. Take about 1 more minute. About 1 more minute. All right, as you get to the end of a sentence, let's come back together. So I gather from the level of energy that I heard in the room that this was an interesting activity. Any reflections about what it was like to start by checking in on something that had worked? right, yes. It brings up your energy and gets you off to a great start. I'm repeating this not to insult you, but for the people at remote locations who can't hear you speak. So it started things differently, okay? And one of the things that we'll be talking about with appreciative leadership is how it can not only start things differently, but keep things going differently. And I want to point out something, that when I gave you this assignment, there was some nervous laughter in the room for a moment. And I'm guessing, based on what I hear from other places, that that nervous laughter was a little bit about, oh my God, what am I going to talk about? That when I said talk about something that went well, it may have been hard initially to identify that, because we are habitually set to identify things that are broken. And in part, you all are, that's your job, that your job is to solve problems and fix things that aren't working properly. And so what this is an opportunity, what we'll be talking about today, is an opportunity for you to stretch into a way of working and a way of thinking and a way of being that may work even better in your relationships with one another and with the people that you lead. So what I'd like to do is to take a few moments to set what we would call the global context for appreciative leadership. Appreciative leadership is a new way of working that we believe is uniquely suited to the world in which we're operating right now. Things have changed in the last dozen or so years. New generations have already come of age. Your workforce now consists of many younger people and many baby boomers who are either just retired or getting ready to retire. There's a lot more age diversity in the workforce than there was a dozen years ago. Diversity is the norm at this point. That we have much more diverse workforce, much more diverse communities, and we are working multinationally, especially on the projects that many of you are working on. And so it is no longer true that our workforce consists predominantly of Caucasian males. This is not the case any longer. Institutions are being reinvented. We saw this in spades over the last few years as our financial systems have come to the brink and have had to come back again. The automobile industry, many other institutions are having to transform in order to be able to remain vital. And finally, holistic and sustainable approaches, which were once considered to be sort of optional, are now necessary. That we're aware of changes in our climate, changes in our atmosphere, changes in the world that will not enable us to continue to go on with life as usual. We have to be thinking generations out before we make big decisions. Now, that's the global context, but there's a philosophical context for appreciative leadership as well. Appreciative leadership has been birthed really out of two philosophical traditions. One of these is the tradition known as appreciative inquiry. This is my specialty. This is what some of you heard me speak about when I was here in 2005. And appreciative inquiry is a process for positive change. It is a successful large-scale change approach. In other words, it's a way of moving large systems quickly and efficiently. And finally, it has embedded within it a unique leadership style, which I will talk with you about in a few moments. But the second philosophical tradition in which appreciative inquiry was birthed is what we call the positive revolution. Over the last number of years, several different disciplines have begun to look at change, human change, systems change, from a strength-based, positive perspective rather than from a deficit-based perspective. One of these is the field known as positive organizational scholarship. Some of you may have read some of the work that's coming out of the University of Michigan. Kim Cameron has formed a Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship to look at the intersection between organizational virtue and performance. Another of these is what we call the strengths movement. Many of you have probably read Now Discover Your Strengths, have studied the Gallup materials, First Break All the Rules. The strengths movement posits that human beings and systems flourish when they organize around strengths. And finally, the field of positive psychology, which was birthed really in the 1990s, is beginning to come of age. And people are understanding that human beings change in the presence of the positive more readily and more sustainably. Both of these philosophical traditions, the appreciative inquiry tradition and the positive revolution that spreads across organizations and individuals, are embedded in the theory and the philosophy of appreciative leadership. Now, what I want to do is step back for a moment for the few of you that may not be familiar with appreciative inquiry, to give you a little history about this. The definition, the textbook definition of appreciative inquiry is that it is the study of what gives life to human systems when they're at their best. I'm going to repeat this, and then I want to dig into it for a moment. Appreciative inquiry is the study of what gives life to human systems when they're at their best. Now, there's a few pieces of this that are really important that I want to emphasize. One is, it's the study. Appreciative inquiry is about inquiry. It's about, we believe that human systems move in the direction of the things that they study. And therefore, we change what they study in order to change the outcome. Okay? Second, appreciative inquiry studies what gives life. What gives life. Every human system, being human, has its strengths and its weaknesses. And what we believe is that we can learn more by studying its strengths, by studying those conditions that are present when everything works. We can learn more from that than from studying what is broken. It is about studying what gives life when the system is at its best. Again, every system has its good days and its bad days. And what we know, though, is regardless of how broken that system may appear to be, if we study the times when it has been at its best, we will learn things that we can leverage in service of improving the things that are not working well. And finally, appreciative inquiry is about the study of what gives life to human systems. When my computer breaks, I do not want to sit around and remember a time when it worked. It makes no sense. I need to figure out what went wrong with it. I need to have a diagnosis. I may need to replace a part. I may need to replace the computer. But if I treat a human system as I treat my computer, I lose the opportunities that are available that are going to be more successful. This is about human systems only. And that's why appreciative inquiry has more guidance to offer to leaders, because leaders are not just leading tasks, and they are certainly not leading machines. They're leading people in service of tasks that need to be accomplished. So take this to heart as you look at it. The skills that we talk about today are about you in relationship to the people that you work with and the people that you lead. Couple last things about appreciative inquiry. We believe, based on research and experience, that the questions that we ask are fateful. We only find what we ask about. We only find what we ask about. The questions we ask are fateful because they end up creating the world as we understand it. I will give you a very simple example of a story that I tell sometimes about my daughter, my now 17-year-old daughter, who at the time that this story took place was 6 or 7 years old. We got a cat for her for Christmas. And my daughter really wanted a golden retriever to replace the golden retriever that had died a year before. So she spent a lot of energy and time trying to make this cat be a golden retriever. Now, any of you who are cat owners know that that is not possible. And we have a uniquely antisocial cat. So the relationship between them was degrading at a very rapid pace. And we tried telling her no. We tried timing her out. We tried punishing her to get her to stop doing bad things to the cat. And it wasn't working. And how I remember was she was sitting in timeout one day screaming at the top of her lungs saying, "This isn't working. I'm just getting madder and madder." And so we decided to try something different. What I did was I went to her and I asked her to tell me about a time when she had thought about doing something that maybe the cat wouldn't have liked but had decided not to do it. And she thought for a little bit, and she was able to describe an episode. And then I asked her to come back to me every time that she considered doing something to the cat that she chose not to do for some reason, because I wanted to hear about it. And within about 15 minutes, she came running into the kitchen and said, "Mom, Mom, I just thought about petting the cat, but decided not to do it." "Really? Why did you decide not to do it?" "Well, she was sitting in the sun and she was sleeping, and I realized if I pet her, I would wake her up and she'd be mad." Okay, very interesting, very interesting. Half hour later, "Mom, Mom, I just thought about picking the cat up and decided not to do it." "Well, why was that?" "Well, she was going somewhere else, and the last time that I picked her up when she was going somewhere else, she scratched me and it was really bad." So we went through this for a day or two, and at some point, she backed off of the cat. Now, again, the questions we ask are fateful. They determine what we find. They create the world as we know it. My questions, my inquiry, guided my daughter to think differently about herself and her relationship with the cat. And this is a very minor example of how this plays out on an everyday basis in the workplace. One more example I'd like to give you that will probably look familiar to you. Suppose I were to ask you right now to think about a time when you experienced, to tell me about a time when you experienced stress in the workplace. Just sit with that for a moment. Okay? I bet you've probably experienced it once or twice, right? So just call out a couple of the things that come up for you as you think about this experience of stress in the workplace. Call it out. Hardware failures. Okay? Boy. Say it again? Preparing for events. Good. One or two others.
Failing to meet deadlines.
Failing to meet deadlines. One more.
Resistance from the prime contractor.
Resistance from the prime contractor, and there was one other?
Coworkers not working well together.
Coworkers not working. You've got a lot of stress, don't you? And as I asked you this and you heard each other talk about it, I'll bet your stress levels went up a little bit, right? So when I asked you to talk to me and tell me about stress in the workplace, you re-experienced that. You re-experienced it on some level. Now, suppose instead I had asked you to think about a time or tell me about a time when, despite the fact that there was too much going on, or maybe even that you were shy of resources, that you had a sense of joyful productivity. Okay? Now, I'll bet you that you can find that too. Is that true? Okay? So one person just call out an example of something like that that others might recognize. Yes?
Made a deadline without enough resources.
You made a deadline without enough resources. Good. And each of you has your own story. Now, we will only hear about the joyful productivity if we ask about it. We will only hear about it. And in some cases, what's true is you will only think about it if I ask about it. So what I'm doing when I ask you about your experience of joyful productivity is I'm giving you an opportunity to re-experience and to understand something that you wouldn't ordinarily focus on. Appreciative inquiry is the study of what gives life to human systems when they're at their best. Appreciative inquiry gives people a sense of possibility and unleashes energy in a system that would otherwise remain dormant. So with appreciative inquiry as background, my partners and I spent time thinking about things. We were doing appreciative inquiry work in a number of organizations, some of which Gail described, and we noticed that in some organizations that we would begin a process and it would take off like gangbusters and it would get more and more energy as time proceeded. And in other organizations, we would launch an initiative and it would start really well, and then the energy would fizzle over time. We had a hard time sustaining it. And we became curious about this. We wanted to understand what were the differences between the initiatives that really thrived and those that were not as effective. And one of the things we noticed was that the initiatives that thrived were largely led in a very consistent fashion. That the leaders who were responsible for spearheading the really thriving initiatives had certain characteristics in common with one another. And it was out of this experience of noticing the different leadership styles that we began to explore this concept that unfolded into appreciative leadership. One of the characteristics that the leaders had in common was that they were by and large committed to the positive. They were committed to looking for the positive, to feeding the positive, and to working in a way that we describe as energetically positive within their organizations. Now this led us to ask ourselves, okay, what does this mean for leadership development? Most leadership development is deficit-based. What do? We send out 360 evaluations and we ask people to rate their managers. It's very useful information and some leaders are able to do a lot of good with that. But what would happen if we organized or created a leadership development process that was fully affirmative? So we did this. We created a program called the Appreciative Leadership Development Program. And we hosted it 3 times a year, and we watched what happened. And we had leaders that came through that had incredible transformations in their performance, in some cases in their careers. They became aware of strengths and commitments and things that they loved, and made some different choices about how they wanted to use those. But as part of that appreciative leadership development process, we had embedded a series of appreciative interviews, pre-work included, that they would go out and interview leaders whom they respected to understand more about how they did their work and the choices that they made. And part of the pre-work was a strength-based 360 process where we sent out appreciative leadership profiles to people that they worked with on a daily basis, their peers, their subordinates, their superiors, and that was the material that they came back and digested in order to look at who they were. And those appreciative interviews began to point to a few key strategies that leaders were implementing when they were most effective. These became what we now call the 5 core strategies of appreciative leadership. But what we did was we then carried those 5 strategies out to appreciative focus groups and validated them before we put them out in the book that you're looking at. All of this is what birthed the theory of appreciative leadership that I'll be talking about now. So what is appreciative leadership? Appreciative leadership is described as the relational capacity to mobilize creative potential and turn it into positive power. Appreciative leadership sets in motion ripples of confidence, energy, enthusiasm, and performance to make a positive difference in the world. Now, there's a few aspects of this that I want to call out. Again, it is a relational capacity. Appreciative leadership is no longer about an individual. We're not talking about appreciative leaders. We're talking about appreciative leadership. It is a capacity that is set in motion in relationship with other people. And that appreciative leadership opens something up and responds to what is around it. It is a positive worldview, going back to what we discovered with the leaders of our appreciative inquiry processes. It turns potential into positive power, and I'll be talking about that, what positive power is, in a moment. And finally, it sets positive ripples in motion through implementation of the strategies. What is positive power? Positive power is about the individual, and it's about the individual's relationship with others. Appreciative leadership enables individuals to bring their best forward. Okay? It enables you as individual leaders to be at your best on an ongoing basis, but it also enables you to recognize creative potential. Creative potential is goodness that is there that has not yet come to full bloom. Goodness that is there within an individual, goodness that is there within a team, goodness that is there within a system. And finally, appreciative leadership unleashes positive power by enhancing individual and collective capacity. And it does this through the alignment of strengths within the system. So let's talk a little more about what we call the 5 relational strategies of appreciative leadership. This is what we call, you all have the NASA meatball. We have the appreciative leadership soccer ball. We created the graphic and realized what it looked like, and now this seems to be what it is. Okay, the first of these strategies is what we call the wisdom of inquiry. And it has to do with leading with positively powerful questions. In our book, we say over and over again, people tell us that the people they happily follow are those who ask questions and truly listen to others to hear what they have to say. Let me give you an example of this, of leading with positively powerful questions. We had a client, Community Development Institute. It's a really fine nonprofit organization that manages the contracts for Head Start programs that have been decertified by the national body because of quality issues. Now you can imagine that this is a very hard job for an organization that is committed to working in the energetically positive, because they're getting programs that are broken. It's the only programs that they ever see. And so the question then becomes, how do they lead in a way that is consistent with their beliefs? Their executive director, Carolyn Miller, asked a very provocative question early on of her team. She said, we are working with organizations that are staffed by people who are living on the edge. They're just this side of poverty. Paychecks matter to them. If they miss a paycheck, they may not eat. They may not be able to live without going on to welfare. So what will it take in order for us to guarantee that we always make payroll? What will it take for us to guarantee that we always make payroll? Now, this was a very provocative question that led the organization through a whole series of financial decisions that unfolded over several years, where they changed their accounting systems, They spread their assets out across different banks across the country, so if one bank had a problem, another would be able to cover for them. It had to do with how they managed their assets internally. They made a whole series of decisions in response to Carolyn's very provocative question. On 9/11, when the World Trade Center went down, when the World Trade Centers went down, and many banks were unable to function, they made payroll that Friday because of the systems that they had set into place. So appreciative leadership works in part because it leads with positively powerful questions that lead people and organizations to think differently about who they are and what they are about. The second strategy is what we call the art of illumination, and it has to do with bringing out the best of people and situations. In our book, again, we say illumination is like the sun. When it radiates, people feel and are warmed by it. And they're therefore anxious to give their best. What I'd like to do is I'm going to give you an experience of one of the practices that we use in illumination. Illumination is about seeing potential and shining a light on it. And before I do this, let me give another example from my daughter's experience, if you don't mind. We learn what we need to learn by parenting very often. So this same daughter that nearly killed our cat when she was 5 or 6 years old is very high-spirited, as you might have gathered from the earlier story. High-spirited sometimes translates into disruptive in the classroom. And when she was in the 5th or 6th grade, we got a report card back saying, Hannah Joy's a great kid. She's smart. She's doing real well. But she's so social that she distracts in the class sometimes. That she finishes her work and then she starts talking to people and other kids can't learn. She was very upset about this because she sees herself as a really conscientious student. She went in and she talked to her teacher about it, and he explained what he was thinking, and she understood it. And at the end of the session, he said, Hannah Joy, would it be helpful to you for the next couple of weeks if I were to, at the end of the class, tell you if you've done one of those distracting things so you know what you're doing and what it looks like? And she thought about it for a second, and she said, well, Eric, that might help, but I think what might help a little better is if I can make it through a class without distracting once. Maybe you would tell me that. She said, I don't know what it is. It's something about a compliment just makes me want to do it again. So they spent the next couple of weeks. First off, you should have seen the look on her teacher's face. You could have, knocked him over with a toothpick. He was so surprised. She said, what a good idea. I never thought of that. So they spent the next couple of weeks, and with him giving feedback at the end, and she was organized to that and working for the praise, and it made a difference. So strength spotting is in part about reinforcing what works when you find it, but it is also about finding strengths that you can later reinforce. So here's what we're going to do, is give you an experience of strength spotting here right now. What I'd like you to do is to find a partner. Maybe it's the person you checked in with, or maybe it's somebody different. You might turn a different direction. And I would like you to ask your partner to tell you a story of something that they did well, a success story, something they're proud of. You heard a little bit about it in the opening conversation, but this will be specifically about them. What I'd like you to do is to probe and listen and call out in your mind your partner's strengths, the things that were embedded in that. So you might hear things about perseverance. You might hear things about flexibility. You might hear things about creativity, about the ability to turn things on their ear when necessary. You're going to hear a lot of things, some of which they'll name, but some of which they won't. You'll hear it between the lines. What we'd like you to do then is to reflect back to your partner what you heard in their strengths, and then switch. So everybody will have a chance to tell a story and get feedback, and everybody will have a chance to hear a story and give feedback. We'll do 4 minutes each, 8 minutes total. So I'll let you know when 4 minutes is up. Have fun strength spotting.
Okay, now's a good time to switch, and whoever listened last should now tell a story. think you should begin wrapping up. Begin wrapping up. And as you get to the end of your sentence, it'll be time to rest.
All right. What was that process like? Both the process of spotting and the process of being spotted in this regard. It was great. It was positive. Active listening, that it took really good active listening to get what was there, huh? Yeah. What else? Energetic. Huh. Yes.
It can be hard to take the compliments for yourself.
Yeah.
It was much easier to give the compliments than to, in some ways, receive them.
So it was, in some cases, easier to give the compliments than to receive the compliments. Very interesting. Yes. How many of you do this on a regular basis with the people you supervise? How many of you receive this regularly from your manager? One person. That's cool. What a great manager. That's great. So, what do you imagine might happen if this became a regular practice within Goddard and within the other agencies that you are here to represent? This is dangerous. This is dangerous. It would shake things up a little, huh? Yeah, strength spotting is a crucial skill that's very simple to implement. You don't need to sit down and ask someone necessarily what it is that they did well. Although what's particularly useful about that is that you're not only hearing what they did well, but you're hearing what they cared about. And that puts you in a position then to be able to make choices about how you might assign them. The things, not just the things they're good at, but the things they like to do. Okay? This could be a regular part of your performance evaluation process, but please don't wait until once a year to do it. Okay? And you can also do this at home with your family, with your kids, with your husband. When something goes well, just shine a light on it. Because human systems are sort of like plants. If you put a plant into a dark room with a sliver of light, what happens to it? It doesn't die. It has a sliver of light. I see a lot of hands going this way. If you put a plant in a dark room with a sliver of light, it turns towards the light. And if you turn it around, it turns back around to face the light. Human systems grow towards the light. And what you're doing when you strength spot and when you call out people's strengths and potentials like this, you are shining a light on it. You're giving them something to move towards, something positive to move towards. And it is much easier for a person to move towards something than to move away from something that is not working. So, having heard about one of the strategies, inquiry, and experienced briefly a second one, illumination, I'd like to talk about the third strategy of appreciative leadership, and that is what we call the genius of inclusion. It's about engaging with people to co-create the future. And our book says when you practice inclusion, people feel they are part of something. When they feel a part of something, they care for it. Or in the words of Marv Weisbord, whom some of you know, people commit to what they create. Now, inclusion is a basic strategy of leadership even today, and I know that many of you have learned this and practice it on a regular basis. And in fact, when Dennis and I were speaking earlier this morning, what I hear is that inclusion is really a key success strategy for Goddard right now, particularly on the large scientific endeavors that you're involved in, because no one person or even a single team can have the skills or the knowledge to be able to do the important work that you're doing right now. So inclusion across teams, across organizations, across countries is a key success strategy for Goddard. What I'd like to do is to build on what you're already doing and suggest that you begin considering another level, a deeper level of inclusion beyond what is most familiar. And that rests on two skills that come particularly out of our work with Appreciative Inquiry. One of this is what we call inclusion across improbable pairs. Setting people up in improbable pairs. Now, you experienced a small bit of this morning when I said, you came in with your friends and your colleagues, why don't you talk to somebody else? Okay? Improbable pairs is about putting together people in conversation and in relationship who don't normally spend time together. Now, I would like to share a story about the power of improbable pairs with you. We've done, over the last several years, we've done a long-term award-winning project with a community in Colorado called Longmont, the city of Longmont, Colorado. Longmont is a small community, about 100 years old, that lives in the shadow of Denver and Boulder, which are just up the road. And the whole Front Range of Colorado is becoming sort of a metropolis like the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And Longmont said, we don't want to be part of the urban sprawl. We want to be a vibrant, freestanding community where people live and work and pray and play. And we need to figure out what it would take for that to be the case. And asking a provocative question and reaching out, they decided this is not a choice that the city manager can make, or the city manager's staff, or even the city council. We really need to hear from the people who live here to understand what they love about Longmont and what they want to create more of in the future that would enable Longmont to have the character that we want. So they created a 1.5-year-long process of reaching out into the community. And one of the things that they did was they worked to create improbable pairs of people talking to each other about what they loved. They took the high school soccer team and sent them over to the senior center to meet with people. And they took a local church and sent it across the way to meet with people from a synagogue. They did some really creative things. One of the pairings was a Japanese-American businessman whose parents had moved here, had moved to Colorado as migrant workers years before and had settled. And he had become very successful, and he was very, very prominent in the community. And he was paired with a high school girl who was of Latino origin. And they had the most lovely conversation about what they loved about Longmont and their histories, and they formed this really neat relationship in this relatively short period of time. Well, at the end of the interview, the businessman said to his partner, you're a senior in high school. What are you going to do next year? And she said, well, I want to go to college, but my family can't afford it, so I'm going to go get a job. 2 weeks later, the phone rang at the house, and he called her parents asking permission to fund her education. Now, the power of that came from the relationship that was formed in the improbable pairing. Not only did they learn from one another, but they created a shared meaning and a shared investment in the future of the community, which included the future of its citizens, its brightest citizens. And he was committed to helping to create that. They've remained connected in the years that have followed. And there are many other stories like this that you'll find across the work that we've done. A second element of this is what we call improbable participation. And that is inviting everybody whose future it is to participate in a decision. Now, we're used to saying, okay, I'll get the leader from this team, and the leader from that team, and the leader from this team, and this one person who has some technical expertise, and I'm going to bring them together to make some choices about what we do with this project. What we're not accustomed to is thinking across the value chain. Who are all the people who have influence, who have information, who have investment? Who are all the people who could be brought to the table? Customers. Customers. The people who are going to have to change the way they do their work in order to implement the thing that's coming up. Improbable participation causes you to invite the whole system into the room and creates a whole different level of conversation and outcome that would not otherwise be possible. So now I'd like to turn my attention to the fourth strategy, which is what we call the courage of inspiration. It's about awakening the creative spirit. What we've said in our book is inspiration breathes life into new possibilities. It offers hope in the midst of crisis. And it gives people a reason and a way to go forward. It unleashes otherwise latent potential and sparks the fire of excellence in an individual and in an organization. Now, all of us have experienced inspiration in various ways along the way, but I feel moved to at least share an example that will be meaningful to everybody who's associated with Goddard and with NASA. You know, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's State of the Union address, in which he put forth the idea of moving forward with the space program in an aggressive way. I went online and I